kujua, jasho ni kujijua, sijajua.
Nasikia wakiuliza mhesha takam lini, mimi na bado sina, nauliza vipi na call na reply ni sina. You can see me na tu sana hailipi, I thought me free man na call na mbona ushiki.
Mada kwa pepa ni laughter, mada for pepa ni kashfa, mata kwa koti ni gangster, mata kwa hosi ni hat run. Stop. Stop.
Badala ya stadium, si afadhali ufanye mambo ya state pesa upate mkwanja? Ama namna gani my friend?
State pesa ndo nini?
Igara yo kitu bana. Ndio ile hapa. Delayed promises center elo.
1 million job promises iko wapi? 1 million job promises iko wapi bana?
Wewe wacha kwanza. Ulisikia wapi mambo ya hii 1 million jobs per year? Wacha kwanza. Ulisikia wapi mambo ya hii 1 million jobs per year?
Power Radio. Tune in and power up.
Goramatsule it ni MC Chinese yule wa zigizigi zaga zogo aka Vibes Kwasel. Ati hapa hivi Kenya huwezi chaguliwa kuwa kanzo ama polisi kama una meno. Ati utatoa meno wapi ya kutafuna hongo? Ule tu body kiss.
Kunikula napiga kura ndo upate nyama, kitambi uwe nayo nipaki nimekonda, na kuna zile wanyama una watuma zitukanyage bila makosa, raping our family, grabbing our property. Mama mboga na nasaka tuko ganji, na makenja unataka tuko ganji, mwisho mwezi wanakwenda vitambi, ayena na nataka tena,
ayena this, ayena that, Goramatsule it, bulletproof body kiss. What you say? Them a whole of vampire, them government, vampire you are.
See the stars shining bright for me, as it does for everyone out here. Rabukaka later what he plays, and the sun shines so bright for all. So let us get back to love, dream pains is seen not true. So let us get back to peace, depends it too, depends it too. That I wish to hurt you, yet we have the same blood, same air we breathe every single day. This love we need to make us all live in peace. So let us get back to love. So let us get back to peace. Acha zogo zogo, ni penzi, acha mdogo mdogo. Depends it too. See the stars shining bright for me, as it does for everyone out here. Rabukaka's little water he plays, and the sun shines so bright for all. So let us get back to love. Through your pains is seen not true. So let us get back to peace. Depends it too.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
All right, a very good morning wherever you are tuning in from. Welcome to a very special edition of the Power Morning Drive Show. Today we are live on location. Behind the mask day, and we shall be talking about violence and also talk about human rights defenders and the work that they do in the conversation around gender-based violence and survivors of gender-based violence. We are live at the Mageuzi hub of kickstarting our campaign geared towards talking about and opening up these spaces and conversations around gender-based violence in Kenya as well. Remember, you can get in touch with us on our social media handles. We are at Power Radio. My name is Anna Lupe. You can get in touch with us on our social media handles. We are at Power Radio across all social media platforms. You can also get this live broadcast on YouTube. We are at Power Radio. If you've not yet subscribed, kindly go head out to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and you get hit on that notification bell so that anytime we are live, you are notified. So a day like this, we shall be talking about a lot of conversations around what we can do in terms of helping human rights defenders that work with survivors and victims of gender-based violence across this country. I mean, we've just seen the plight of gender-based violence. A lot of cases we've been hearing a lot of police brutality geared towards specific genders as well. So that is the heart of the conversation today on our event dubbed "Scars Behind the Mask." And so yes, it's going to be a very long day event full of conversations, panel discussions. We will also have interactive sessions of hearing storytellers, poets as well, to give a highlight of the plight of victims of gender-based violence. So let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll start our conversations today. I shall be interviewing some people that are working tirelessly round the clock to ensure that we create safe spaces and safety for our community at large. We shall be talking to some people within the media as well. We'll also be talking to some human rights defenders, properly known as HRDs, as well, to get us up to speed with what is happening in that space as well. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we get into our conversations for today. This is Power Radio. See you after this quick break.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Design kutumada tena kwa mtutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Design kutumada tena kwa mtutu Mini wa ghetto nimezaliwa ghetto na mambo zangu zote mimi nafanya ghetto wafande ni shuku na isi skendo niride kutupiga hadi toi kapendo find a way ati mbona use force find a way ati mbona cock gun find a way unajua kuna court na ni kama basi kesi mimi na hapa tuta solve find a way ati mbona use force find a way ati mbona cock gun find a way unajua kuna court na ni kama basi kesi mimi na hapa tuta solve Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu design kutumada tena kwa mtutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu Elombangana nukuliam na Hutu design kutumada tena kwa mtutu
Mahali nimefungwa so quite kazi level so kuishi kwa hii life si kitu nimechoose kulose mabeste juu ya bullet za upuzi nafanya mtaani nikae kasi na ujuzi combination ya necklace za ukombozi nafanya wengi wabaki na haya machozi system so corrupt iko na utohozi so slippery kanyanga kikohozi kuta zitaonyesha footage zote zimefichwa kina JM Jumo akinyang'anywa vichwa niko na vision ya moto ikiakishwa kila pahali nchini despite ya kutishwa ega zinaacha kanguo ya white mtaichafua hata nikizikwa skali yangu mtaifufua chenye nasema kaa kuna basi itakuwa na casta
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power
All right,
Radio.
welcome back to the Power Radio. This is the Power Morning Drive Show. My name is Anne Wanyoike, and I have the privilege of being joined by one illustrious, the one and only man who does not need any introduction. And you guys, you will know who I am talking about when he introduces himself. Mr. John Alan Namu is joining us on the Power Radio, Power Morning Drive Show today. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay.
It's so good to see you.
Thank you.
Mama,
you.
I made it. First of all, it's Mama, I made it. It's finally good to meet you. Have you been? How are you feeling?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Good, feeling good. This is a nice event that you guys have got here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure,
really
for
looking
sure.
forward to it.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So I did say that you do not need introduction, but for the one person maybe who's just crawling out of their cave, kindly introduce yourself to our listeners.
No worries.
Yes.
So my name is John Alan Namu. I'm an investigative journalist,
Yes.
and I've been one for the past maybe about 20 years. And I'm the co-founder of a company called Africa Uncensored.
Yes.
We do public interest investigative journalism.
Yeah.
Based out of Nairobi, but now also focusing on other parts of Africa.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, as you may know, today we are gathered here together to talk about, the very pertinent issues around gender-based violence.
Yeah.
And of course, you as a media practitioner, these are stories that you probably have dealt with even in your reporting as well.
Yeah.
So, to to kind of maybe gauge on the status of media reporting on issues around gender-based violence.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where do you think we stand on that?
Well, I mean, to the extent that there's awareness of the fact that, Kenya has a problem
Yes.
with gender-based violence, and, specifically the crime of femicide, but gender-based violence generally, I think that the Kenyan media has done a good job because everybody, well, I don't say everybody, but very many people across the country have an understanding of what GBV is, an understanding that it's wrong, and despite what, some cultures might say or some cultures that we've come to inculcate might say.
Yes.
So that's good. I think where we struggle a little bit is in trying to just advance it beyond the episodes, right? Beyond the very ghastly and grim news that we get about deaths in Airbnbs or, murders in, university halls or what have you.
Yeah.
I think it needs to go beyond that. And the truth of the matter is, like, I don't know what that discussion will look like. I don't know what it should look like, but I certainly know that we know we have a lot of work to do in that front.
Yeah, and you speak about work, and that was going to be my next question. Then, what then should be the responsibility of media practitioners in whatever form that they're part of? Because obviously now we are talking about diversified ways of telling stories. You know, so what would be the responsibility of media practitioners in specifically talking about issues around gender-based violence?
I think what it's always been, which is to inform the public first of all, but information not just beyond the, like I was saying, not just the event of, but to really provide depth in terms of understanding what are the drivers of gender-based violence in our society.
Yes.
Where are the flashpoints, which people, which group of people in particular might be victimized,
Yes.
More than other people in terms of GBV. And obviously, how then do you build a culture that now moves away from gender-based violence and creating a society in which, this isn't a crime that is the rule, and it should be the exception. Because we can't eliminate it completely, but we surely can, provide the kind of environment where we have that culture, where people look at something and they don't say ini maneno ya watu wawili.
That kind of thing. Right. And something also that I've been picking up a lot in our conversations around gender-based violence, and specifically in media circles, is humanizing the victims, right? And dignifying as well the victims, while also villainizing, I think, the perpetrators of this violence. Where do you think the interplay comes in terms of how do we make sure that we are doing those two things, humanizing and villainizing?
So in terms of creating a villain out of the perpetrators, I can understand the motivation for that. But if we're going to be able to resolve this issue, we also have to understand who the people who perpetrate these crimes are. We have to understand what their backgrounds are. We have to understand what their motivations are. What paths led them down to the point where they thought that it would be easier to strike a woman or to strike a man than to have a conversation with their partner. So that's what I think about. When I think about humanizing, I think about humanizing everybody.
Right.
Just so that you can understand that, sometimes when you see a crime being perpetrated, there's a context and there's a background. Obviously, it's not with every crime. Sometimes people are just, bad. But with crimes like GBV, you can tell that it's a nurture thing. In many instances, it's a nurture thing. So what parts of our society are nurturing these kind of individuals, both men and women, right?
Yes.
That would use violence. And it's different forms of violence, not just physical violence, also emotional violence. Would use and rely on different forms of violence and either be celebrated for it in some quarters or not be, or not be admonished for it in different ways. So that's how I look at it. But humanizing is definitely part of what I think about when doing these stories. In fact, I spent pretty much all of last year producing stories 6 out of 8 of which were about femicide.
Wow.
So a lot of my work and my time went into understanding who the victim was, understanding who the perpetrator was.
Yeah. And as your work as an investigative journalist, I mean, you just say that 6 out of 8 stories you were doing was, to get and to understand, these people. I can only imagine the mental toll that it can take on someone. So for even upcoming investigative journalists or people who want to try their chance in the fourth estate, what would you tell them in terms of self-care, in terms of mental health? Like, how can they ensure that they are not, I mean, I don't know that you can separate yourself from the work, because sometimes it's important maybe to see yourself in it. But there's also an important aspect of decentering yourself from the story. So what would your word of encouragement be for the upcoming investigative journalist in that front?
Vicarious trauma is trauma.
It's real. Yes.
And it's trauma.
Yeah.
Sometimes because you didn't experience it doesn't mean that you can't be affected by it. So learn to understand what your triggers are, what things might trigger certain antisocial behavior in you or behavior that is different because of the experiences that you've had.
Yes.
And then learn to have ways and means of managing it. So, if I'm to use my own example, so I've got a very good network of friends and people who I can talk to about the kind of stuff that, that I've witnessed. But I also use exercise as a form of just being able to, I guess, just disconnect.
Yeah.
Disconnect from everything and sort of refresh myself. Because, when you're going into an environment in which you are sort of, mentally impaired in a sense, where you're carrying all of this trauma, it affects even how you conduct yourself in these environments.
Yes.
You become desensitized and you're waiting for someone to cry because they've gone through a traumatic thing. You're not really listening to them and understanding the grief that they've, or how they're responding to it. These are ways in which, and journalists do that many times.
Yes.
You sit there and you're like, wow, that's a sad story, but I've had 10 stories that are 10 times worse. So you're not even thinking about the person in front of you. You're disconnected in that way. So it's very important to really step away, take breaks, make sure that you can come back and be fully focused. Because you owe them that. At the end of the day, you're the one who owes them that in as much as you're the ones you're giving them the platform, the opportunity. You owe them your presence. You owe them your focus.
You owe them your presence. I love that. And you have an illustrious career that spans over 20 years in the media industry. So of course these issues have also been we've had stories of gender-based violence in media houses as well. So could you kindly speak specifically to that? Like, how do we navigate issues around violence, whether it be sexual violence, maybe from top media bosses making advances on maybe somebody who is just entering into the media landscape and they do not know what to do. So could you talk about that?
That's a great question. And I have to admit that this was a culture even when I joined the newsroom, where you'd have sort of like some of the older guys, both guys and women, but I mean largely men, sort of like, hanging around some of the younger interns and people who don't have as much access to power. And before you know it, you start to hear stories about what this girl had to do or that this guy had to do, etc., etc. The first thing to do is not be a part of that, right? Don't be a part of it. Even when you hear the stories, sort of like step back and be like, okay, so I mean that's messed up, but I'm not going to participate. And the second thing is, when you see it happening and you can tell that someone's being victimized, and this is a difficult one, speak up. Right? Like, speak up, because these kinds of people cower when it comes to having that kind of sunlight being directed to them. So constantly shed light on the issue and say, man, this is not okay. What you told her, that's not okay. And it's very, very tough to break through. That kind of locker room culture is very, very hard to break through, and it's very hard, especially as men, to be able to stand up and talk about something that is in complete, I guess, opposition
Yeah.
to how the men in your group are acting, and can be very uncomfortable.
Right.
But there's a certain point in time where silence then now becomes complicity. You kind of have to be brave enough to speak up and just say, look, man, I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
And at the very least, just remove yourself from the environment. And the more of us who remove ourselves from those kinds of environments, the more of us who don't approve of it, means that there are many more people then now who will be, I guess, partners in building this kind of culture and this kind of society.
Yes.
In which both men and women who are in unsafe relationships find respect, find compassion out there.
Yeah. Wow. So, what does justice look like? You've done a story as a journalist. So, what is what does justice? How do you create a story that translates into justice to the victims of gender-based violence as a journalist?
That's such a good question.
John Annan thinks that I have good questions. Guys, I told you I'm not going to be humble after this. Anyway.
No, it's a good question because the answers are difficult one. Because justice, from my experience, justice looks different for different people.
Right.
So obviously there's the formal sort of like judicial means of justice that most people pursue. But when you have someone behind bars, let me give you an example.
Yes.
Like I did a story about Wamboi Kabiru and Moses Dollar, journalists. And Dollar killed his wife. And he's been in jail. He should be released this year. You speak to Dollar, he sounds like he's completely repentant for it. But you speak to Wamboi's family, and they still hold quite a bit of anger towards him.
Right.
Because in as much as he's gone through this process, they still don't have their daughter. So then what does justice look like?
What does justice look like?
in that situation?
Yeah.
Or you look at someone like Purity Wangeshi.
Right.
Young KIMC student who was murdered by her boyfriend.
Yeah.
The case is starting now. Like a year after all of this.
Yeah.
So even that delay, what does it look like when your story or your case isn't being heard?
Yeah.
Even the case of Ivy Wangeshi, one as clear as that, took a very long time.
Yes.
So then, if you look at it from the judicial lens, then you miss half the story. Justice to me is being firmly on the path towards like healing yourselves. And being able to live past such a tragedy with renewed insight and as little bitterness as possible.
Right.
That's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like to me. Because I know I've seen people for whom the justice system may have given them what they wanted, but they still feel empty. Because at the end of the day, in as much as that needs to happen, that perpetrators of such heinous crimes should be in jail, it still leaves behind so much messiness that nobody ever deals with. Nobody ever now comes back to pick up the pieces and say, okay, so this is how you can move on. So justice is sort of like closing that loop for me.
Right. Wow. We have unfortunately have to end this at this particular time. If somebody asked me what my future for the media or what my hopes and aspirations in media reporting would be, ideally I would be like a future where we do not have to report on cases of gender-based violence. I don't know what would your answer to the same
For sure.
would
I
be.
mean, like, you want a future in which you have less work, because that means less crime.
Yes, la vida loca.
Yeah, and I wish that you could tune in to, and this sounds really weird coming from an investigative reporter. But I wish you could tune into radio or watch your TV or go onto your feed and just be finding all of these amazing stories like that are really interesting, that show the depth and the strength of humanity. But knowing humanity, this is not something that's going to happen easily. But maybe then that's a call for the next 20 years to create the sort of like media environment and stories that you want to see, rather than responding to what the society is.
Wow. John Alan Namu, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. Thank you for coming on Power Radio.
Yeah.
And thank you so much also for the work that you're doing in the media ecosystem. We need more of you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys. Thank you much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Is this where we do the handshake?
Yes.
They have to see that I handshook you. Awesome. That has been my interview with the one and only John Alan Namu, and we've been discussing about the role of media in contribution, or rather spotlighting issues around gender-based violence. Now, we shall be here the whole day. We are talking about gender-based violence and human rights defenders and what that conversation should look like, and just assessing the status of the two conversations. So let's take a quick breather. When we come back, we get into our next interview, but do not move a muscle. We'll be right back.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio. Focus vibration.
Nami ni nani ndo swali nauliza, jukila tumbo imekata kushiba, awase uko natukanyagia, tumechoka tunaumia, sauti ya mnyonge nani atasikia, ni wapi pa kukimbilia, slogan utumishi kwa wote, mbona tena unyanyase mnyonge, haki sina amechukua yote, na nchi imepakwa matope, wololo 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 wololo.
Trust them. Hawatuwakilishi, kazi yao tu ni kukula. Parliament uko wera ama nikuza sura. Ulikuwa close na wananchi but mwingi ofisini umaruka kaa chura. Kumbe ndo vako yako, ukiget unaishia. Then after 5 years ukikam back una expect unakuchia. Umekula zote hadi set victims umeshindwa kulipa fidia.
Wololo 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 ya eh. Wololo 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 pinyo ketore. Mafisi hao hao, wauaji hao hao, tajiri hao hao, bado hao hao. Wezi ni hao hao, walafi hao hao, mafisi hao hao, wauaji hao hao, tajiri hao hao, bado hao hao.
Basari ulipea mtoi wako badala ya ghetto youth. Tenda zote zilienda kwa kampuni ya you. Kumekenya the better option, tabaki tumepunguza you. Tired hadi toka tunadai mse wa kudu. We want paper, tumechoka kukaudu. Unaonekana gawansa after 4 years kali pia. Services to provide na taxes tushalipia. Next time ukamkurutisha kura, mkono tunakutupia.
Wezi ni hao hao, walafi hao hao, mafisi hao hao, wauaji hao hao, tajiri hao hao, bado hao.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
Hi guys, hey, welcome back to a very special edition of the Power Morning Drive. This is Power Radio. My name is Anne Wanyweke and I am your host. Today we shall be live at Mageuzi Hub for a day full of activities and conversations around human rights defenders, but specifically geared towards the work that they do around gender-based violence and, upholding human rights in that front. And with me, I am joined by a man who absolutely needs no introduction. He is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Mr. Irungu Houghton is in the building, guys.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Very well.
Karibu sana, Power Radio.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. How are you feeling?
Very well. I've got a fedora on.
Yes.
The radio listeners cannot see it, but I'm looking really
very
glam for a Friday morning.
Very glam for a Friday morning. Right. All right. So today we are here to do something rather, that we might not necessarily want to do ideally in an ideal world, right? But we are forced to have such a conversation. We're talking about, gender-based violence and, of course, the state of human rights defenders as well. As the executive director of Amnesty International, which a lot of your work is to work in the human rights space, what do you think the state of human rights stands at as we speak?
No, in many ways, I think without wanting to depress ourselves on a Friday morning, we have to say that the state of human rights in Kenya at the moment is quite dark.
Yes.
We have seen over the last 6 months attacks on protesters, use of excessive force, use of tear gas canisters as if they were lethal weapons.
Yeah.
We've also seen abductions and killings on the streets of Nairobi and other places.
Yes.
So I think for us as Amnesty International, we have continually found a resolve to declare that this has to stop and that we have to see a return to lawful policing and also a respect for human rights. But we have seen many victories this year as well, and sometimes it's important to keep those in mind. So today we are 3 days before the launch of the 16 days of activism, and how great it is that we're not even waiting for the 25th of November, that we have started to say we're going to celebrate gender-based activism to bring feminicide and other forms of violence against women to an end.
Right.
Femicide is on the rise. We have heard it authoritatively from the Deputy Inspector General that 97 women and girls were killed over a period of 3 months. And that's literally one woman every day for the last 3 months.
Right.
And, for those women that went to the streets, and a few men, including myself, who went to the streets in January, we managed to tip 10,000 people onto the streets to declare that femicide has to be made history. It has to be stopped.
Yes.
No action was taken. Parliamentarians did not look at the legal framework. The president did not speak. The police did not take quick action. And 10 months later, we are now having to call on the authorities to take action. So I think this is a moment also for rededication and a commitment to a country where everybody is safe.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, yesterday when President William Ruto was giving his state of the address, state address, he did say that his government is committed, first of all, financially to fund 100 million Kenya shillings towards the Safe Homes, Safe Spaces campaign for the 16 days of activism as well. Do you think this is enough? Do you feel that it is enough? And what more should be done? Because the feeling around this kind of spaces is that there's not political goodwill to even talk about femicide, for example, and gender-based violence.
So as Amnesty International, we're not stuck on one way of speaking, which is the condemnation. We also commend.
Yes.
So I think it's important for us also to recognize that when duty bearers move in the right direction, they are moving in the right direction because people spoke, because people went to the streets, because women were attacked and went to courts and they sought justice. And therefore it would be wrong, I think, and not helpful for us to condemn a statement that says 100 million shillings is being put into the construction of safe houses. But having said that, I think while we commend the 100 million and we can commend the president now for a more I guess what you'd call practical approach to this. He spoke 2-3 weeks ago, and we were very concerned that the phrase that he used was essentially "let the authorities do their work." It means nothing. What does that mean? But I think when you start to see tangible statements that declare budgets, that declare expectations, that declare outcomes, then the authorities begin to move in the right direction. In terms of the 100 million, Jerry Migwe, who has been running Usikimwe for many years, would tell us that a safe house is not a building. It is not a structure. It is actually services inside of a structure. So what we would want to see is that very quickly that funding translates into psychosocial support. It translates into livelihoods advice because many women, when they leave their homes, they leave also their financial security.
Yes.
And we don't want a situation where they're unable to leave a safe house because they have no alternative. So livelihoods advisory services is very important so that women can be economically independent and not have to go back to an abusive husband or an abusive family.
Yeah.
The third area really is legal empowerment programming, because whenever a woman is stigmatized, whenever she is prejudicially, whenever there's prejudice or whenever there is violence, there has to be a legal recourse. And therefore, we have to see paralegal support, we have to see professional legal representation, and we need to see a criminal justice system that ensures that we go from investigation to prosecution to conviction. That is what makes the difference. And as we know from the case of Elizabeth Ikaro, which was concluded just a few months ago, it took us a very short period of time to essentially find the person who had killed Patrick Nawit guilty of essentially, homicide.
Yeah.
And I think that's also important as we think about how to respond to femicide.
And what is the role of organizations like Amnesty International in, for example, making access possible to psychosocial support, as you're saying, litigation opportunities, for example, to these perpetrators, and also upholding the victims of gender-based violence.
So as Amnesty International, we're not a non-governmental organization. We may be registered as a non-governmental organization, but I often say that we are really a movement of members. And at the moment there are 3,000 members. We have 110 chapters across the country. And probably the best example, I think, recently was the work that was done around Elizabeth Ikaro's case. So we had legal representation alongside the Defenders Coalition. One of our lawyers in our office basically followed up that case, made sure that witnesses, crime scene evidence was not tampered with, so that the judge was able to make a fair determination on the conviction.
Right.
So legal representation, I think, is very important. Documentation is another area of work that we work on. We pride ourselves as an organization that believes in evidence and really data, and it is evidence and data that essentially determines guilt or innocence. And I think that's the second area.
Right.
Our members have been involved in different ways. I think this year they are going to be running, I think it's in Nakuru, they're going to be running campaigns on the 16 days of activism.
Right.
Because part of the work that needs to be done is just awareness raising. It may seem a strange thing, but when people feel that there are no consequences for slapping a woman, for raping a child, or even worse in terms of large numbers of people, they will probably take action. And what we need to do is to make sure that it's clear what the penalties are, what the consequences are if people do this. But more importantly, create a culture that says, if you see something, do something.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing.
And you did speak about culture, and I'm thinking one of the fundamental issues around gender-based violence is it's a cultural issue. We have issues, cultural frameworks that really do not help us, like patriarchy, for instance. So in terms of cultural barriers, how do we ensure that we are dealing with these very deep-rooted cultural issues that have led us to this point, up until this point?
No, I think we have to demystify culture. Those with power and privilege tend to define culture in the way that suits them.
Yes.
It is not cultural. It is not African. It is not in line with our national Kenyan. It's not in line with our national values. To beat, to dismember, to mutilate, to torture, and to kill women. That is not our culture. In fact, there is nothing that my grandmother or my great grandmother ever told me about this being part of being Kenyan.
Yes.
For those unharmful cultural practices like FGM, for example, or child marriage, it's increasingly clear that each generation has to find ways of reducing the negative practices of the previous generation. And that's how we moved on. So in some ways, if you think about it, even 10 years ago, not long ago, married women could not get pensions in their own name. They couldn't get housing allowance in their own name. The understanding was that would somehow come from the male provider. Or, for example, women were not considered to be eligible for positions of power within the military.
Right.
And thirdly, it was kind of considered that women should remain in the home and cook. And what we know from our history is that women have always been productive. They have always been in the fields. They have always been producers of income and revenue for families. And in some ways, we have to challenge this idea that we need to go back to a situation where one gender is less than the other and is allowed to be attacked by the other gender. It's just not acceptable. I think the other thing we have to look at is what's happening to men. And increasingly, I'm beginning to argue that we have to pay attention to something called toxic masculinity and how it impacts on us as men. And I speak as a man. That this idea that somehow if a woman rejects your flirting, your interest in having sexual relationships with them, that you have a right to violate them. That's not a healthy way of thinking about life. It is really the response of a fragile, very brittle man that he cannot accept to be told thank you, but no thank you.
Right.
So I think we have to challenge what's happening to our men and young boys, because I think that's also part of the problem. And often what I say is that we have a country in which there are very many crushed men and very confident women. And I think that's the relationship we have to transform.
Tension,
that's the tension.
Yeah, that's a tension. All right. So as we bring this to a close, ideally, we want to build a world where there is absolutely no violence to anyone, whether man or woman. But in this moment where we are, of course, there has to be some distance covered. So in between now and then, what needs to be done in between?
So I was thinking about this, and every year, and of course, the 16 Days of Activism is an annual event, right? So every year, I think about what's different about this year. What is it that we could do differently next year? And I think most of the times the practical solutions are very similar. So I think there are, there's really a need for safe spaces. There is really a need for support structures for women who are attacked. This year, I'm particularly present to the idea that we need more alliances and with new actors. So we now have a statement by the Deputy Inspector General and several police officers. We have the President now pushing for his government to do better. And I think one of the things we have to argue is that they need to start reaching out to feminists and working with them more closely. So, for example, on the 10th of December, there will be a massive rally and procession of women. Wouldn't it be great if police officers, particularly women police officers, came out and marched alongside protests to say that this is not just an issue for feminists. It's not just an issue for women. It's an issue for the entire society to rally behind.
For sure. Awesome. That's it, guys. Thank you so much, Mr. Irungu Hilton, the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. And we have been having a conversation around the work that Amnesty does in terms of human rights defenders and just upholding that work and their contributions towards the human rights space. We will take a quick break now, but do keep it Power Radio, because we will continue having conversations and interviews around the conversation. Today we are talking about scars behind the mask, what needs to be done in ensuring that we completely eliminate gender-based violence in society. See you after this short break.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
Oh no, no. Oh yeah. Juzi nilikuwa nimetulia kwangu nyumbani, kwa jirani nikasikia kelele za kuhuzunisha, nikasongea kusudia kuelewa kinachoendelea. Mbona mke analia, wampiga bila huruma? Kumbe ni kawaida, toka kitambo ni mazoea. Hakuna raha nyumbani na watoto wanaumia. Vita si suluhisho, no, si suluhisho. Vita si suluhisho, no, si suluhisho. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie. si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho. Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie, si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho.
Kila wakati ni matusi, vita imekuwa ni kawaida. Hatuwezi kuongea kubadilishana mawaidha. Mume wangu wabishwi anajiona shujaa, hata ninaogopa sema yako si vitisho. Imekuwa ni kawaida tangu kitambo, nishazoea. Pesa pia natafuta na mapenzi nazidishia. Heshima mimi nampa ila sikosi kilio.
Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie, si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho. Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie, si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho. Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie, si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho. Usipende vita rafiki, mapenzi mtunzie, si lazima tuishi hivi, inaumiza roho.
Jealousy, always comparing myself to you. Sometimes I feel like I overdo. Sometimes I feel like I'm over you. Sangin I feel like I have no clue. Sangin you are the moods. Sometimes I act a fool. Sangin ninachoma sana. Sometimes tunakosana. Sometimes I act too cool. Sangin you act a fool. Sometimes you drive me crazy. I swear I drive you crazy. Consistent, consistency, consistent, consistently, consistent, consistency, consistent, consistent, day, 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 day by day, day, day by day, 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 day by day, day, day by day, day, day by day, 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 day by day, day, day by day, 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 day by day. Consistent, consistently. Anxiety, naanza tabia za self sabotage. Naanza tabia za overjudge. Naanza kujifungia, naanza kujikazia, mwenzio nafunga hisia. Sometimes I feel so blue, sometimes I have no clue. Saa ingine unachoma sana, sometimes tunakosana. Saa ingine ninapotea, sometimes unanikosea. Sometimes you drive me crazy, I swear I drive you crazy. Consistent, consistency, consistent, consistently, consistent, consistency,
Yeah, girl I do. Ndabia Ghana today you available. Me I really wanna come and roll with you. Mali baby neza kuwa me and you. Only.
Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba.
Let me be your service provider. I give you the cable, show you my talent, baby, and you be the label. You be the goddess, and I be the temple. Give you the cane like you never knew that I was able. Hourglass body, can I get a minute of your time? Can I really show you how a minute? You maximize my nini when you're in a mini. Bad girl, kana denge anakuva nini? Ona kuvese wendo na die. Ekana na tuvese, see you know that I'm the guy. Mina mpango za kifiji wakibonga Dubai. Peter best though, fanya mabazuwa Zubai. Aye. Look at the way she deep so, she rocks so. When she whiny pale kwa disco. Who got the fire with the body come on a pistol. Ona vilo na maliza mandem. Finito, finito. Girl I do. Ndabia Ghana today you available. Me I really wanna come and roll with you. Mali baby neza kuwa me and you. Only.
Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba.
Yeah. Now that you aware, kakaseka na kulike. Nipe keys a box, wingy and on the lock. I can tell you're a performer by the way you hold the mic. You been really bad, let me cuff you, no cops. Kiss you on your neck, tell you everything is great. Nikonja and you're a full course meal on a plate. African time, I guarantee I come late. Love you heavier to a chani, walking goja, what a weight. Get it? And I can take care of you, no advantage. Put you in a yes, you can have it and some fashion. Love the way you classy and you bougie, you're a savage. See how you want it like a gypsy with a talent. I see where ukianzenya aki yao unanikunywa sana utadhani ni happy yao. Kisha shauri moyo sini shauri yao. Mini shauri yangu sasa ni show ni how. Girl I do. Ndabia Ghana today you available. Me I really wanna come and roll with you. Mali baby neza kuwa me and you. Only.
Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba. Tell me kana weza sababisha, sababisha, saba.
Yeah. See, I see. Okay. As he cop, tell you no. Kijakazi ameniada, amenipini mdomo. Alama kwa mkono, mchoro za kambanono. Kwa mbao amenilaza kama kipande cha nyama. Masani ya lunch usahau, kumbuke niko njaa sijadishiba. Ana fist on me na mapose bila pressure. Sabuni ashachanganya akinyosha kwenye boot kama Mercedes Classic. Ni uchungu ikiingia, nikisonga nasongesha. Tena ndani kabisa, hasira inanijaa. Git inamwagika, tena nikisonga kiso nachomoa, macho imekodoa.
Nigusa vibaya mimi mtoto kijana. Msichana wangu ndo walisha familia. Mama amemchapa baba, amempiga vibare. Nani atanamini nikisema nadanganya?
Niko na guilt na mawazo kwanza za kuogofya. Nasikitika sana vile jamii nanitenga. Kila mtu ananisema kosa ilangu tena, na kijakazi alinitenda. Niko na trauma inaniumiza. Mawazo ya kujinyonga, virusi zinanikula. Shetani ameingia, nimechoka juu. Hakuna neniamini nikisema jakazi amenilawiti. Majuto ni mjukuu, afadhali ingefeta mdomo. Majuto ni mjukuu, afadhali ingefeta mdomo.
Amenigusa vibaya mimi mtoto kijana. Msichana wangu ndo walisha familia. Mama amemchapa baba, amempiga vibare. Nani atanamini nikisema nadanganya?
Speak it out, normalize it. Silence sio noma, normalize hiyo noma, kunormalize sio noma, kuishinalize ndio noma. Si ukate hiyo ego, normalize.
Napata 10,000 kwa mwezi, 3,000 narushia nguruwe, 2,000 ni ya nyumba, 500 ni ya maji. Kenya Power misi walipangi. Mi msanii nimechoka kulipa deni ya Mosaina. Elewa tu nimesota, mshahara ni exposure. 1,000 ya chakula kwa mwezi, 2,000 kulipa madeni, 1,000 kwa karo, 1,000 kwa karao, nguo mpya misinunu wangi weli. Ni msanii nimechoka kulipa deni ya Mosaina. Elewa tu nimesota, mshahara ni exposure. Gai wako gai gai dao daida, gai wako gai gai dao daida, shoka na ihenya. Gai wako gai gai dao daida, gai wako gai gai dao daida, shoka na ihenya. Nilitupilia mbali pombe na sigara, na si sababu niliokoka. Bibi lae mmoja tu kwa mlango, ndo yeye hulala kweli. Nikisema nimesota, usiseme nidakoima kweli. Elewa tu nimesota, nalipa deni ya Mosaina. Fanya hesabu utaona, sitaweka hapo ndani mke wangu, sitaweka mavazi hata zile nyeti, mke wangu hananga kibeti woi. Nikisema nimesota, usiseme nidakoima woi. Elewa tu nimesota, nalipa deni ya Mosaina. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya. Na najua sio mimi tu napitia hali ngumu, mwanamme wanasema lazima ujikaze, lakini binti yangu alipotaka switi nisipate hata shilingi, nililia, nililia. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya. Gai wako gai gai dago daida, gai wako gai gai dago daida, shoka na ihenya.
Again and again and again. Yeah. Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours. Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours, huh?
Louis V, Cartier and Dior. I'm fucking with Lil Missy, I met her in P4. And every night I kick it like Thierry and Rowe. They used to tuck me down, but right now they adore me. I'm with Big Billy in the stew with the squad. The captain is Morgan, the flow is enormous. And if they hate, that's me at the door. Yo. And if they hate, that's me at the door. Yo. Me hoping I get love for the batty boy antics. Last time I rap on the radio, they had static. And way since high school, I had 8 mathematics and chemistry. Ain't got no time for no jealousy. Spend my time in the lab, rapping bars, sipping Hennessy. And ever since I lost love, I'm cold, I can let them breathe. They can let me be.
They can let me be.
Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours. Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours.
Big bidder, smoke like a big figure. You a dick liquor. Flow steady like a big river in Dicker. I was hitting it, but you wanna live with her? Take a trip, get a crib, hit a lick with her. She don't want a batty, but she want zim zimma. We're about to come bar mim zim zimma. We're about to come bar mim zim zimma. Zim zimma love. Oi, listen to my words clearly. I'm a myth, not a joke, not a Jim Carrey. You ain't got motion, you move barely. Have you met Terry, the tooth fairy? It might take your teeth, take one. Hit a lick, then breathe. I'm a different one, I'm a different breed. I don't wanna be locked up, rather be free.
Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours. Feeling so fresh, deep to my toe. Who's the pen girl, mon ami, te amo. Dolce & Gabbana, Louis V's and Dior. Blow the candle, make a wish, promise that it's yours, huh? Start kama vroom, fast kama zoom, crash kama boom. Venye nimefall, nisha think kuwa groom. Love ika bloom, hati toke tumb. Ex alidhani amewacha meni doom.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
Right. All right. Welcome back to the Power Radio. We are going now to get into a live conversation. Right now on stage is the Executive Director of Amnesty International, Mr. Irungu Houghton. He's going to be a keynote speaker. So let's go in and listen into what he has to say on this very pertinent discussion that we're having in around gender-based violence in the work around human rights defenders.
165 days, including a leap year. We need actions on every day. But let me go to my presentation. Monica Jerry would be 60 years old today if she had survived the attack by Frank Sandstrom on that US ship back in 1980. He killed her with a beer bottle, and he got charged 600 shillings for the manslaughter and 2 years best behavior. The St. Kizito girls, 71 of them who were raped in 1991, would be in their 40s today. And the woman that we all forgot, Agnes Wanjiru, who was killed by a British Army officer within the battalion of the Duke of Lancaster, would be 36. She was killed in 2012. They said she was a commercial sex worker, and that somehow that justified her death. This is the year in which we learned to think intergenerationally. This is the year that we began to demolish the idea that our ethnicity, even our class, provides the conditions for violence that are different for different ethnicities, class, and other categories. So I wanted to start with these examples from different generations, because I think one of the things that we have to always keep in our mind is the actions that we take today are born of the courage of several generations before us, and that we betray that courage when we do not take actions today to bring down this crazy statistic that was given to us by the Deputy Inspector General just recently, that 97 women were killed over a period of 3 months. And that is one woman every day over the last 90 days. So we, as a generation, not necessarily a Gen Z generation or an Alpha generation or a freedom generation. I like to call myself the freedom generation because that was essentially the independence generation, not baby boomers, because I think our communities were booming babies long before the Americans in the 1950s and 60s. we can take actions knowing that we are really just building on the strengths of the other people who took action to prosecute, to convict, to raise awareness, to take action to shelter women over the years that have passed. This year, I think we can celebrate at least two incidents or two achievements. The first is somebody who I'm sure we have forgotten her name, but Eunice Wakimbi. Anybody remember who Eunice Wakimbi was, or is actually? She's a survivor. Eunice was the woman who was thrown out of a Ambank building office. And she would have died, but unfortunately, or fortunately for her, she basically didn't fall the full, I think it was 17 floors or something like that. She decided that she would take her perpetrator to court. And 2 years later, Moses Gitama was prosecuted, convicted, and was found guilty of manslaughter. Unfortunately, he just got 5 years. But her courage demonstrated that actually the courts do work if you follow the procedures and if there is support from different quarters. We all probably remember Homeboys and that conversation by Shafi Wairu and others, where they made light of what had happened to her. And for that, Shafi lost his job. And the company was forced to issue a zero tolerance policy on this. But I think, as we will hear from Janal Namu, the work in the media houses still continues. I want you to reflect on the life of Elizabeth Ikaro. She didn't make it. She was stabbed to death in 2022. But this year, her perpetrator, Patrick Nawit, was found guilty. He was convicted. And we learned that if human rights organizations, if families of victims come together with police officers, with prosecutors, it is possible to find justice within a 2-year period and for people to get convicted. So there are many things I think also to be encouraged by. I wanted to end by essentially proposing some very practical actions that we could take. The first is that violence always proliferates in the presence of fear. The first thing we have to crush, the first thing we have to break through is fear and the silence that is too prevalent in many of our communities and even in our homes. Less than 5% of all crimes get reported. 5%. Why is that? It's because too many of us are not doing something when we see something. So we have to create this culture of see something, do something, take action. And in doing that, what we will do is create communities, homes, schools, medical centers, police stations, any space in this republic that is primed, ready to seek justice for those that are hurt. The president has just announced 100 million shillings for safe houses across the republic. Many of us remain skeptical. As Amnesty, we had to think a little bit about this. What happens when duty bearers take the right decisions? We don't want to get stuck on condemnation as the only way that we respond to these things. We have to think about how do we commend the right actions. So we can commend the allocation of 100 million, but we must take the trouble to follow that allocation. So those of us who are researchers, those of us who are in the spaces, we must actually follow it to make sure that what is announced actually gets to the ground. We need to argue that it's not just buildings that women need for shelters. They need psychosocial counseling. They need livelihoods advisory services. And they need lawyers to make sure that those cases find their ways through court and perpetrators are essentially convicted if they are guilty of the crimes that they have committed. I want to end with one more suggestion. We do need now to think beyond our safe spaces. Feminists cannot only, like myself and those of you who are here, and I hope I'm not using that term in a way that you will say, not me, but feminists who are here, we have to find ways of working outside of our own comfort zones and the constituencies that we are comfortable with. We have to reach out to prosecutors, and I'm very glad to see my friend Mark Baraza here from the ODPP. ODPP is critical for the process of criminal justice. And they have to find ways of also saying that they will have zero tolerance for anybody that hurts women or girls or men for that matter. So we need to find new language and new alliances with different circles. And I wanted to make a suggestion that on the 10th of December, as one of the biggest of the 3 rallies is being organized on International Human Rights Day, wouldn't it be great to have police officers walking alongside protesters to declare that they too are protesting against the levels of femicide? Wouldn't that be a powerful statement, particularly if we had women police officers leading that? Maybe one last thing as I close, we have to do better on what is now being called technology-assisted GBV. Online spaces have become horror spaces for many women and for many men also. Let me just put it that way. I met with the Inspector General and the 2 Deputy Inspector Generals of the National Police Service on Tuesday. And my biggest concern was not whether I would be brave enough to point out that 73 abductions, 61 deaths, thousands of arbitrary arrests are unacceptable. That was not my concern as I prepared to meet with the new Inspector General. My concern was, what would I experience online from trolling? And I find that very strange that in a moment like this, when you're speaking truth to power, it is not the powerful that we worry about most. It is our own constituencies that seek to reduce our trust levels and our credibility levels in the public eye. So I think we need to get better at how do we protect each other on those spaces when we are doing things that are bold and when we are taking actions that are, I guess, pushing forward. So let me stop there and just say, and I guess we can say this now a bit more confidently. The UN Women Organization have announced the theme for the 16 days of activism. And the theme is Orange the World, Listen and Be Moved to Act. For some of us within Amnesty International, the word orange would probably take us into the root of a political party. But I think we can now declare that actually there are bigger orange movements out there in the world that we need to be part of and that we need to act on. I thank you very much for coming out on a Friday morning, 3 days before 16 days of activism. You are trailblazers, you are leaders. Let us continue the activism over the next 16 days and the next 365 days as well. Thank you.
From sunrise to sunset, all day and night. Power Radio.
All right, welcome back to the very special edition of Power Morning Drive Show. We are here for the Scars Behind the Mask, a conversation, a day-long conversation that will be filled with conversations around gender-based violence and human rights defenders. We will be looking at all that across the front, panel discussions as well. We will also have victims and survivors of gender-based violence. But earlier on, you were listening to the voice of the executive director of Amnesty International, and he was giving us some of his recommendations. You know, he sits at the very helm of this kind of conversations, and of course, a lot of his work, you were able to hear him pointing out some of the things that he works with. But I do understand that right now, our next keynote speaker, Mr. John Allan Namu, investigative journalist, is also taking the stage. So let's go right now and listen to him. Then we'll come back and talk about some of the things that they are talking about as well. Keep it Power Radio.
First of all, to Power, thank you very much for inviting me here to speak. You know, in the pre-launch to 16 Days of Activism. As you mentioned, I am a storyteller. And so I'd like to tell two stories today, just as a way of demonstrating my point. The first is on screen here. So it's just the first 4 slides of this presentation. I've given it before, but this is particularly important for me to give on this day. So note the date. What's the date today? The 22nd of November 2024. All right. So let's move to the first slide. The one after this, sorry. Yeah. There we go. I don't know how many of you will remember this lady. 29 years old. Her name was Naneo Muthoni. I got to meet her on this day in 2022. Only I met her at her funeral. So this is actually the 2-year anniversary since Naneo was buried. So that's a picture that I took while we were filming. Up in the tents is her family. This is a place called Besa in Kajiado. And that's her grave, right? I didn't know Naneo before the week preceding this. I didn't know her story. But I got introduced to it, like many Kenyans, at the same time, when her body was found in a 1-bedroom bedsitter somewhere in Langata, in Onyonka Estate. So I know you'll struggle to see this, but these are 3 pictures that I took. Let me start over here, right? So this is a picture of their bedsitter. It's no bigger than this stage. All of this, every wall of that room had Naneo's blood on it. Every wall. Now it's not a big room, but you can imagine the level of violence and depravity that must have taken place in that room for this to have taken place. But it was these 2 last pictures that were the most striking for me. This is a long shot and a close-up of the door handle. As she was screaming for help, she tried to leave, but she died at that doorstep. Now, the story here is that Naneo and her boyfriend had altercations like this before, many times before. The bedsitter sits at the back of a maisonette. So the people renting in the maisonette knew that this violence had been going on. In fact, they had even tried to intervene. And Naneo would leave and go down the street to her parents' house. Her parents literally live in Langata, but only come back a few hours later or a few days later. This was the last time she was going to this house. She had decided she was going to say goodbye to this guy. She was going to go and get her things, and she would live her life moving forward. I know this because part of the exhibits that were left in this room were her diary, and she had noted this down. Her boyfriend killed her, left her in that house, covered her with a sheet, and ran for the border. Got money from some people abroad, and only was caught when he tried to cross back to Kenya to access an M-Pesa. He wouldn't have been caught if their story had not made the news. His name is Bernard Mother. He's currently in remand, right? But his case, I think the case took a year before it began. Now, I use Naneo's story on the anniversary of her burial to demonstrate that Naneo's story is not a singular story. It doesn't stand out, even in terms of the way she died, or the person at whose hands she died. Unfortunately, Naneo's story is very similar to hundreds of others, right? You can go to the next slide. So I asked this question in this presentation, and a few slides down, and we'll stop with the slides now. I show you that in the data that we've gathered alongside our partners at Odipodev on femicide, which we launched at the beginning of the year, between 2016 and 2024, there were 500 women who died in this way. A majority of them were killed by their husbands or their boyfriends, right? A majority of them, over 70%, right? The other sort of like shocking statistic is the nature of the crime. You saw Naneu's bedroom, right? Majority of these deaths happen, you can tell a lot about the nature of the death from the weapon that was used. Naneu was bashed and slashed to death with a bottle that she used to use to decorate. She used to do beadwork, right? And those were some of the tools that were used. Majority of those deaths happen with blunt items, whatever is close by, knives, etc. So it's a very intimate way of killing a person, right? The nature of the weapon can tell you the nature of the death, right? Now, as I'd mentioned, Naneu's story is not a lone story, but what does it tell us about the kind of society that we're in? For that, you have to look at the other person in this story, which is Bernard Muthe. And I had occasion to look into this. Bernard Muthe grew up in a violent household. He grew up seeing his father abuse his mother, seeing his father abuse alcohol, seeing his father womanize in the neighborhood. He grew up knowing that that was the sort of relationship that he could have, and nobody sort of like directed him away from this. Now, this is anecdotal, but I was just talking on Power Radio, and last year, while we were filming this series that we were doing called The Last Door, I think I'd said 6 out of 8 of the stories that we had done were on femicide, but it's more like 8 out of the 13 that we had done. And in every story, the circumstances were similar. A disgruntled partner, a very intimate and sometimes incredibly brutal and painful way of killing that woman, and a background and a story of the perpetrator that suggests that there was no intervention at any point in their life to tell them that, look, you're going down the wrong path. And so I asked myself this question about, femicide and gender-based violence. Now, just as a man, who are the men that I looked up to when I was growing up, right? I was very fortunate to grow up in a 2-parent household with a father who cared enough to actually show me what a man is supposed to look like. But look at the statistics in Kenya today. What percentage of all of our households are single-parent households in which there is no influence, especially for young men, from older men, how to behave, how to act, how to grow up? Look at the converse to that. Women have incredibly